Working together to make a better community. We can create a brighter
Welcome
day.
to Community Conversations. I'm your host, Steve Mantis, and my guest today is Tom McDowell, an instructor at Ryerson University. Welcome, Tom.
Thanks, Steve. It's a real pleasure to be here.
So, Tom, give us a little bit of background about yourself. Did you grow up here in Thunder Bay?
No, I didn't. I have a lot of family here. I'm born and raised in Sault Ste. Marie, and I've spent the last several years doing my PhD in Toronto, the Toronto-Hamilton area. And I've since moved up here. I've been living up here for the last several months with my family and with my partner who lives up here. So it's a beautiful place, and I'm really happy to be here.
Well, we're glad you're here too. Now, Tom, what did you do your PhD in? Tell me a little bit about that.
I did my PhD in policy studies, which is basically an interdisciplinary program at Ryerson University. I looked at a number of different things, but explicitly the ways in which policy and political economy intersect, which is one of the things that led me into studying basic income.
Uh-huh. Oh my gosh, we could talk about public policy and its impact for a long time. Oh my gosh. So, in a way, one of the things we really want to talk about is that basic income pilot project. Folks here in Thunder Bay may remember that we were part of this pilot that took place a few years ago. Can you just give us a little bit of background about that pilot project?
Yeah, so the basic income pilot project was instituted by the Wynne government. It started in 2017. The concept of basic income is essentially that it's a no strings attached income guarantee to individuals. And the idea was to give people, for single individuals, about $17,000 or thereabouts a year. And for couples, about $24,000 a year. For individuals with disabilities, there was about a $500 top up every month. So the idea was to give people additional money and additional security and stability, and to see see what the outcomes of that would be in terms of their ability to to subsist and survive. So we conducted a study in the Hamilton area of recipients who had received basic income to find out more about their experiences.
So, if I recall, this is not a new idea, the basic income. There's been discussion around this for decades, and it's not necessarily a left-right kind of split either, if I recall. I believe the Wynne government asked Hugh Segal, who was a longtime conservative member of the federal parliament, I believe, and advisor to prime ministers, to do a little report that kind of set some of the foundation of the basic income. Can you give us a little background on what's happened before, or how did we end up here?
The concept of basic income, can really be dated back a couple of centuries. The idea of giving people a wage floor, the idea of giving people a subsistence floor that they would not fall below, can actually be dated back really to the inception of industrial capitalism. However, as you say, it has had its moments throughout the 20th century as well. None other than Milton Friedman, who is, many will remember as a right-wing right-wing economist in the United States, a famous libertarian economist, actually advocated for basic income as something that was a more market-based solution than the welfare state types of social programs that we we're more used to. So there's a long-standing tradition, both on the left and right, of embracing basic income. Obviously, from a leftist perspective, it's a social program, it's an income support program that can potentially help people. But from the perspective of the right, there is the particularly from the libertarian right, there is the sense that basic income actually allows people more freedom. In other words, you can't be perfectly free unless you have sufficient income to do the things that you want to do. So there is a libertarian variant of basic income as well, both on the left and the right. And as you say, Hugh Segal was instrumental in designing the pilot. And Hugh Segal is a conservative senator who's been advocating for basic income since the early 1970s.
Right, and so Ontario seemingly then decided, well, let's check this out. Let's see how it works, and they designed a program. And what did that pilot look like? What were the parameters?
Well, as I said earlier, the parameters were that every individual received a base level income supplement for a period of approximately 3 years, or up to 3 years. So this allowed individuals to plan in terms of their in terms of their immediate futures. For individuals who work, there was a 50% clawback. Now that's important because it meant that individuals did work on the pilot and that they were subject to a 50% clawback, but not the full clawback that is often the case with other social programs, and that functions as a disincentive for some people to work. So this was one of the things that basic income was intending to test. How would it impact employment outcomes?
So just to kind of play that one out a little bit. So if people get this basic around $17,000 a year, and then they go to work and make say a minimum wage job, they get $20,000 a year, they lose half of that, but they end up keeping the 17 plus the 10, so they end up with an income of 27,000.
That's right. That's exactly right. I'm going to trust your math on that one, but that generally speaking is the way that it was designed to work. There was an income ceiling that one couldn't exceed. I don't remember the number off the top of my head, but I think it was something around $37,000 for a couple. So if a couple earned more than that, then they would start to lose 100% of their basic income supplements. But up until that point, it was a 50% clawback. And one of the things.
I'm sorry. I was just going to say. So who would be qualifying to participate in this pilot?
Yeah, it's a very good question. It was mostly for low-income Ontarians, so people who were below. I think it was a $24,000 income threshold. I would have to go back and check that, but it was designed for low-income Ontarians. And actually, in our study, about 39-40% of the of recipients who we surveyed were previously receiving OW or ODSP. So a very significant proportion were previously social service recipients.
And so in a way, this was designed as kind of like a big research project.
That's exactly what it was. It was a great big research project in 3 separate cities or 3 separate communities around the province, designed to test how this pilot would work, with the intention of potentially creating a broader basic income program that would be permanent. Of course, we never got to that part because the pilot was canceled prematurely. And that also meant, it was one of the reasons that we decided to conduct the study, the early cancellation of the pilot also occurred with the disbanding of the research team. And so what that meant is that unless the academic research community went out and began to collect evidence, all of those experiences would have been lost. And arguably that was the government's intention with canceling without collecting evidence. It's pretty clear that they didn't want to see the evidence. And that's one of the reasons that it was canceled earlier. So anyways, we attempted to fill that gap imperfectly, but we did manage to fill it.
And so in terms of those government actions, if I recall, so this was initiated by the Liberal government under Kathleen Wynne.
That's right.
There was an election. Doug Ford of the Conservatives won, and that's the after that election, then they chose to cancel the pilot.
So if I have my dates correct, I think the election was in June of 2018, and the basic income pilot was canceled at the end of July 2018. So about a little less than 2 months after they took office.
And so because it was in a way designed as a big research project, there were researchers engaged right at the beginning. Were you part of that team?
No, I wasn't. Although one of the members of our team, Wayne Luchuk, was actually on the committee that designed the pilot, and that was going to assess the evidence as well. He was actually signed a contract with the government. He was eventually released from that contract and was able to help out with the project.
So how long did the pilot actually run then before it got canceled?
Well, I think the government started recruiting people in, I want to say like April of 2017, and then the pilot was canceled in July of 2018. So most people we surveyed received it for less than 17 months. And in fact, one of the stories that we heard is that the pilot, perhaps for a variety of reasons, the government actually had a hard time signing people up to give away free money, at least in the Hamilton area initially. People were distrustful. This sounds too good to be true. Arguably, it wasn't very well advertised. People who were receiving other support, such as ODSP, were understandably skeptical about losing their benefits to go over to some pilot project that there wasn't a lot of information about. So that was one of the more interesting things that we heard in the interview process.
And so you started interviewing folks that had been receiving those benefits that had now been canceled.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about what you found.
So we conducted, there were two parts in effect to our research study. The first part was a survey. We recruited 217 of the 1,000 or so recipients in the Hamilton area. We don't actually know how many recipients there were in the Hamilton area because the government never actually released that information, but there were meant to be about 1,000, so we used that as our baseline. Through a variety of recruitment techniques, mostly through Facebook ads and through op-eds in the newspaper, the Hamilton Spectator and whatnot, we were able to access about 217 of those recipients. And so we found a number of things. We found in effect that basic income was working as it was supposed to. People's general health improved, people's outlook on life improved, people's mental health improved, people were able to purchase gym memberships, people were more likely to go back to school. So there were, and frankly, we found that people were actually, although one of the criticisms of the pilot is that it functions as disincentive to work, and we can talk about this. One of the things that we found is that basic income, in fact, functioned as something of an employment program. It made people more employable because they had a better outlook on life, their mental health was better, many went back to school. So there were all kinds of benefits that we found from the pilot in a variety of different areas.
And was that pretty much across the board, that everyone had improved health, or what was the mix? How did that kind of
Not entirely. Everyone's experiences were different depending upon the way in which their life circumstances had unfolded both before and during the pilot. So for some people, that meant they were highly dependent upon the income supports, and it fundamentally changed their lives. For others, the differences weren't so extreme. Some young people, already had decent jobs. Perhaps they were gig economy type jobs, or jobs that, and by that I mean jobs that are contract-based in nature. So maybe there was periods where they weren't working. And for a lot of people, what they in fact used basic income to do was to stop working jobs in which they weren't happy, to stop working jobs in which they were underpaid, to stop working jobs in which perhaps they were being mistreated, and to find jobs that were in their fields and that were consistent with their objectives. Just giving people that little bit of time, that 2-3 months to step back and apply for something in their field, in many cases made a significant difference. So that's one of the reasons why it was difficult. When you see, for example, that 85% of people said they reported positive mental health, I mean, that's a really strong finding. But the reason that the other 15%, might not have said they had positive health is not necessarily because the pilot wasn't working, but there are a variety of reasons why that might have been the case.
So in terms of that issue of geez, we give people free money, they won't want to work anymore. My sense is it's partially dependent on the amount of money. I think in Canada, our average industrial wage is up there in the mid $40,000 a year. When we look at different government programs in terms of supporting individuals, there's a really wide range. People on social assistance might be getting in Ontario around $10,000 a year. Under the CERB, we saw $500 a week seemed to be kind of the average. So that comes out to what, $26,000 a year. Here we're talking about 17,000, which still puts you in the poverty realm, and you can really see, hey, that may be not the best place to be, anyways. So people would have an incentive, I'm assuming, to better themselves.
Well, this is the thing.
Better their family situation as well.
Mm-hmm. Well, this is the thing. I mean, even in Hamilton, especially in Hamilton, where living costs are reasonably expensive, $17,000 does not even put you at the poverty line. So it's not as if it was a panacea for people in that respect. For some people, it was, as I say, a critical lifeline. For some people who, for health reasons or one reason or another, hadn't been in the labor market for years. Perhaps it was the case that they didn't use basic income as an employment program, but as a way to improve their lives in other ways. But what we found is that a significant number of people, found that they were more employable. And in fact, I think the number is, only about 25% of the people that we interviewed who were previously employed left the labor market. So almost everybody who was previously employed remained previously employed, or at least the vast majority of them did. And for those who did leave the labor market, that 25% that I'm mentioning who left the labor market, as I say, many of them were leaving jobs in which they were being harassed. They were being mistreated by their bosses. That was not consistent with their lifestyle needs, which is to say, their ability to look after their children or whatever might be the case. And were able to do things that were more consistent with their lifestyle needs. And like I say, for 50% of them, that meant going back to school. And one can imagine, either upgrading their skills or going back to university to take we had a couple people who went back to do grad programs. And of course, this is going to make them more employable in the long run. Most people were using the money to improve their lives.
And now, what we've seen over the last decade or two is a big change in the world of work. Even my parents, and even when I was young, it wasn't uncommon for you to get a job, and it could be a decent job that you could stay with for your 40 years of your working life and end up with a little pension or something at the end. That's really changed. And you mentioned the gig economy. How has that changed, and how do you think that kind of impacted the pilot project?
Well, one of the I think what you're referring to is what we would sometimes refer to as the standard employment relationship, and that's the idea, as you're talking about, the concept that so many of us are familiar with. You get a job with one company, and you're able to largely work in it your entire life. You have union benefits. You're supported by your unions. You have good jobs and security. And unfortunately, that is not the way that the labor market functions anymore. Well, it does for some people, but for a very significant portion of the labor market, people are engaged in precarious work. Today, it's quite commonly the case that individuals, rather than selling their labor as wage labor, are required to do it as contract workers. They don't have the protections that wage laborers might conventionally have. Individuals work on contract, where they might go weeks or months without a job trying to find a freelance position elsewhere. The nature of the digital economy has fundamentally shifted things as well. So as the complexion, and we really saw this with CERB, where so many people were falling through the cracks of the initial CERB installments. You might recall back in March and April, there was considerable debate about how expansive CERB ought to be, because the standard employment relationship upon which employment insurance programs are based no longer applies. And I think that CERB was a real wake-up call to people that the economy for many people is not sufficient to provide for their needs. And that's one of the things that basic income is designed to do. It smooths out the gaps that occur in people's lives. And especially for young people today, working and living precariously, I think that's something that resonates with people.
So as part of your study, was there anything around like a cost-benefit analysis that, okay, we're investing in these parts of our population? Are we getting a return on that investment? Was that part of the process at all?
Not really, not in the sense of material gains, but but we can reflect upon that, and we can say that there was significant benefit relative to the cost. The cost of the pilot was actually fairly insignificant, but the benefit to these individuals was profound. I would say that the majority of people we spoke with found that basic income had profoundly shifted their lives or transformed their lives in at least some way. Whether it's the young man who was able to quit one of his 3 jobs so he could spend more time helping out his mom who has cancer, whether it was the woman with cancer who was able to pay for burial insurance so her son didn't have to worry about those things, or the young woman who quit the job that she was desperately unhappy with to go back to grad school. Those are the kinds of experiences that we heard. And and they speak, I think, to the impact of giving people a little bit more money, and not just the money. The money is critically important, and it was for a number of people. I don't want to undermine that, but the stability of knowing that you have money not only now, but a month or 2 or 3 up the road, because that is really what the precarious economy is about. People who don't feel as though they know what's coming around the corner. And they don't feel as though they feel tremendously underqualified relative to the skills that they have. So this is one of the things that basic income allowed people to do. It gave them hope. That was really a critical element of the pilot, I think, of the outcomes. I hope I answered your question. That was a very long-winded way of coming back around to it.
Well, this is quite familiar to me, as many of the folks in the audience know. I'm an active member of the Thunder Bay Injured Workers Support Group, and myself, I'm an injured worker and went through the workers' compensation system. And back in the day, I got a pension, a secure payment, that gave me that security as well. I didn't have to worry about, keeping a roof over my head and food on the table. And that allowed me to take all kinds of choices in terms of my employment and career path that I see isn't working for many other people who don't have those secure payments. And our system has been transformed so that it's much more difficult for that kind of long-term security. And now we're seeing high rates of people with mental health problems and substance abuse problems in a way because of that lack of control. And of course, when I think about that cost benefit stuff, that all costs society big bucks.
And one of the things that we actually saw in the pilot is that a number of the recipients we spoke to were actually injured workers or workers who had been who had been laid off as a consequence of things that had nothing to do with their own actions, and who were in the later stages of their career trying to rebuild or simply trying to survive after a serious workplace injury without an income stream that frankly was sufficient for their needs. So that was another element to the pilot that was, again, it was at least in terms of our study, it was fairly broadly distributed in terms of age, and we saw a variety of different benefits across the various age groups. Obviously, they were different in complexion for younger people than older people, but equally beneficial.
So, Tom, we're in about the last minute of the show. So, what would you share as kind of the takeaway from your research for government and policymakers, kind of linking back to your previous studies? What advice would you give policymakers?
Well, I think that the experience of 2020, the experience with COVID-19, has demonstrated the need for more comprehensive income supports for individuals, and I think that we've done enough tests of basic income now to have around the world, not just in Canada, to have a fairly decent sense that this works and works well. And our study, in effect, affirmed that the intention of the pilot, the pilot was designed so that both as an employment plan, but also as a poverty reduction plan. And we found that it worked. We found that it worked almost precisely as it was designed to. Made people's lives better, made people healthier, made people happier, made people more social, and it made them more employable. And so it was a program that benefited almost everyone who received it.
So, Tom, if people want to get a hold of you and find out more, what's the best way to do that?
I think the easiest way is probably by email. I can be reached at thomas.mcdowell@ryerson.ca. I have a Twitter page as well, but I actually don't remember the handle at the moment. But I'll give it to you. Maybe we can put it up at the bottom.
All right, Tom, thanks so much for coming on the show. We sure appreciate it. And to all the folks out there in TV land, please stay safe. And we're back online, and tune in again soon.
Thanks,
Take
Steve.
care.
Enjoyed it. Take care now.
Working
All right, bye-bye.
together to make a better community. We can create a brighter day.